Morning.
Morning, Gav. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad at all.
Well, that's good
Interesting,
to hear,
interesting
mate.
morning.
Yeah, I suppose we've got the first of our banks reporting in ANZ this morning, and obviously a big lead out of the US. With that record high they hit overnight.
Yeah, I mean, last night in the US was really interesting because there sort of was no one single event. There was a whole lot of things like their GDP number was sort of what they roughly expected. Their the oil price spiked dramatically and then came right back. Bond yields fell back a bit, and all of it
Yeah,
looked like let's pile in. So yeah, interesting night over there.
yes, yeah. Seems to be a lot of those. Very difficult to explain some of the moves. It's very hard to justify. I think the US market at record highs. As much as they probably believe, or Donald Trump believes that the oil price at these levels isn't going to affect his economy, it certainly is going to have some effect.
Yeah, I mean the company reporting supported some of the big moves last night as well. I mean that's
Mm.
backward looking. It's not forward looking. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's hard to imagine that we can keep hang on to these record highs with no end in sight in oil price rises or oil price staying elevated. So yeah, we'll just
Yeah,
have to ride it out and look for opportunities elsewhere.
yeah, definitely, definitely. So, well, I suppose we can jump in and have a quick chat about the ANZ obviously reporting and just the banks in general.
Yeah, I thought their result was steady would be the way to describe it, I guess.
Yeah, look, there were some pretty good numbers within it, and I think this is what a lot of us had expected that the period over the last sort of 6 months had been reasonably good. I think you did see a slipping in that net interest margin over the last quarter. The first quarter of the last half was actually quite good. The second half of the half year was a little bit slower, and I'd say a lot of that probably comes back to the oil price move and the whole Iran issue. And I noticed in their provisions, it wasn't concerns around bad mortgage debts or an increase in that area. It was more provisioning around possible cost blowouts from the Middle East conflict. So that could be something that could settle back down if we do get a resolution there.
Yeah, I think the market might have punished it much more if he hadn't have delivered his cost restructures weren't delivering as well. And he's done all that big change in their new CEO, and it seems to
Yeah,
be delivering. So in a backdrop where things are tough, the under the hood stuff was looking okay. So yeah, market's already priced in. And if you look at the chart there, it's already priced in a fair bit of bad news based on the last sort of
yes.
month or so. So I think it's now, wait and see how the Middle East stuff pans out and what interest rates do from here.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the key. And obviously, we do have a federal budget next week. Any tax changes regarding property taxes, negative gearing, and the like could also be something that could affect the banks a bit. So something definitely to watch. But look, I do feel our banks have come back to levels while they're not great attractions from a yield base. I'd always sort of looked at the idea you never buy a bank if you're not getting a yield of about 1% over our cash rate. Right now, you're probably just getting the cash rate, so you sort of if you're a yield player, the banks probably aren't that attractive. But I think for those that want to trade it, there's probably is some upside, and a lot of that will probably revolve around the Middle East matters sort of settling down. So something definitely to watch.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And if you look at the other three banks' charts, they're all, a little bit, they're not that dissimilar, I guess you'd say. So I think next week's reporting for the other two will be watching for, their own internal differences. And
Yeah,
yeah, another percent fall or so out of the banks, and you'd be certainly starting to think about either, if you didn't own a bank, you'd be looking at it and maybe looking at starting to do some other things or selling puts or that sort of thing.
yeah. Well, just on that selling puts, I just had a quick look. The June $35 put. So that's out to the 18th of June. It's obviously post ANZ paying its dividend, so you wouldn't be entitled to any dividend. But if you were sold the 35 puts, you're getting about 75 to 80
Yeah,
cents.
wow.
So picking the stock up if you did at around about $34.20, which is probably a pretty attractive level. If not a bad bit of premium to bank if you were happy to take that bit of ANZ exposure, which I think at those sort of price levels it's probably justifiable even from a yield point of view. It probably starts to look a little bit more attractive. So something you could consider if you did want to have a bit of exposure there. And as you said, if you didn't already have some, that'd be probably a trade you could look at.
Yeah, certainly. At that sort of premium, it's around 5,000 odd shares. It's still a pretty good premium.
Definitely pretty attractive. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. The one thing that stood out to me the last few days has been APA. You look at a chart there, it's had a really good run over the last 12 months. It's sort of jumped outside some of its technical stuff over the last couple of days. It's
Yeah,
well above its price targets, its maximum price target now. So that equals candidate for selling calls for me. There's not a real lot of premium in this stock. There never really is because it's a pretty steady sort of stock. But I look
yeah,
at out to June. It goes ex-div the end of June. But if you were to sell the June, you're going to get 30 odd cents, and the stock will come back a bit with the dividend coming out of it. You'd roll it out and look to hang on to it for another month after that. So it's certainly a candidate for doing something. And depending on where your portfolio sits, you could certainly look at selling some calls out to June with a view to rolling to get the dividend after that, depending on where it is.
yeah. And look, if you wanted to be a bit cautious, you could look at the June 10.51 being the European strike.
Yeah.
Obviously, the stock's around $10.40 at the moment, but you'd probably get 20 odd cents, which is a pretty good return for a $10 stock
Yeah.
for basically 2 months of time. And as you said, there is some divs to come through. Yeah, I think 27th of June is actually when they go ex-div. So the June option actually would expire prior to the dividend, and then you could also jump out and look at selling in July once that one has expired. If if the opportunity is there.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look at its chart. I think it's also one of those stocks that's, big infrastructure base. Traditionally, they have higher debt, so interest rate starts to hurt them. So, at these sort of levels with that sort of background, it's certainly got a question mark whether it can stay up here much further.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's exactly right. That why selling calls right now is very, very justified on that stock. Looking, obviously, if you were a little bit nervous, maybe lightening out of the stock, it wouldn't be a bad idea
Yeah.
either. But certainly selling those covered calls, get them happening would be a great move.
That's exactly what I had a client do this morning. They lightened, they didn't sell, they sold a few, and then
Yep.
bought into a gold stock, bought into Evolution Mining on the back of its reports,
Okay.
which was very good.
Yep.
And they bought into that. So, those sort of rotations are there as well.
Yeah, excellent. All right, mate. Well, look, market's up about 60 points. We've obviously chased the US move overnight. We really have had a very negative sort of last week or so. I think we've had 7 down days in a row, which is
Yeah,
quite a long stretch
yeah,
for us. So it's nice to
absolutely.
see some green on the screen.
Yeah, that's hopefully let's see how it hangs on to it for the rest of the day. Trump likes doing things on weekends, so it's not out of the question we could fade a bit into the afternoon, but let's hope we hang on to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, mate. Well, you have a
All
good
right,
one.
have a good one. See you later.
See you, mate.